You have started the same habit 11 times. Maybe it is the gym, maybe it is the writing, or the language app, or the sleep schedule, or the one you told 3 people about and then quietly stopped mentioning around them. Whatever yours is, you know the shape of what happens next better than you know almost anything else about yourself. Your first week is easy. You are not gritting your teeth through it. You are just doing it. And somewhere around day 5, you catch yourself thinking, this time feels different. And you mean it when you think it. Your second week costs more. By the third, you are negotiating with yourself. You will do the short version tonight. You will make it up on Saturday. You will restart properly on the 1st of the month. Then one evening, you skip it. And your skipping it is so unremarkable that you barely notice you have. 9 days later, the whole structure is on the floor and you could not tell anyone which day it actually died. And then you do the thing that this entire video is about, and you do it so fast you have never caught yourself doing it. You look at the wreckage and you draw a conclusion about your character, not about your method, about you, that you are someone who starts things, that whatever other people have, you got a smaller allocation of it, that your problem is buried somewhere in your personality, below the level you can reach, and that this is simply the kind of person you turn out to be. You have arrived at that verdict 11 separate times now, and you have never once put it under real pressure, because 11 data points feel like proof. 11 data points prove nothing here, because all 11 are runs of an experiment you set up wrong, and you have spent years reading the results as a statement about yourself, instead of about the setup. For the next 40 minutes, I want to show you exactly which part you set up wrong. And it is one part, it is mechanical, and it was solved 23 centuries ago by a man whose job was to fix this problem in several thousand people at once. He did not do it with motivation. He did not do it with discipline, or accountability, or a better morning routine. In the year 255 BCE, in the southern state of Chu, a man of about 60 accepted a job that nobody remembers him for. The job was magistrate of Lanling, a district administration. Not a court appointment, not a school, not a retreat in the mountains. A post with a jurisdiction, a granary, a tax roll, a calendar of assize days, and several thousand people in it who had not asked to be governed and were not, on the whole, interested in becoming better. He took it at the invitation of Lord Chun-shen, and he held it for 17 years, which, in the final decades of the Warring States, was a remarkable length of time to hold anything at all. Picture the conditions you would be working in. The old Zhou order has been dead for generations. 7 states are eating each other. The state of Qin in the west is absorbing everything it touches, on a schedule, with a competence everyone can see and nobody can stop. And your district has a reasonable chance of ceasing to exist inside your own lifetime. Your neighbors are being annexed. You keep the records anyway. Before Lanling, he had spent years at the Jixia Academy in Qi, which was at that moment the most concentrated intellectual environment on the planet. Scholars from every competing school living at state expense and arguing full-time. Mohists, Taoists, legalists, rival Confucians, logicians. He was honored 3 times as its most senior scholar, which means he had heard, in person, from the most sophisticated people alive, every available theory of how you get a human being to behave well. And he watched every one of those theories fail to reach the street. Not fail intellectually, some of them were beautiful. They failed operationally. The doctrine would be established, agreed upon, elegantly defended in the hall, and the people outside the hall went on being hungry and self-interested and frightened and no better than they had been the week before. The arguments were winning. Nothing was changing, so he drew a conclusion almost nobody draws, and it is the reason his name is still on a book. Being persuaded of the right thing is not what makes a person do the right thing. Something else does that work, and if you cannot name the something, you are not teaching anyone. You are talking. Then he took a district for 17 years and found out what it was. Now hold his question the way he had to hold it, because it is your question with the self-pity removed. You have been asking how to want it more. He had several thousand people who were never going to want it at all, no way to make them want it, and an obligation to produce order out of them regardless. If people will not become good on their own, and he was certain they would not, then what exactly is the machine that makes them good? Comment below. Before we go further, name yours. Which habit have you started the most times? And what number are you actually on? Not a round number, a real one. The answer he arrived at is not inspiring, which is exactly why it works. A magistrate in that period governed almost entirely through form. He did not govern by being personally virtuous in the direction of the population. He set the calendar. This is when grain is assessed. This is when disputes are heard. This is the day the granary opens. He set the measures. This vessel is what a measure of grain is, and it is this one, and it does not change because you liked last year's better. He set the sequence of a hearing, who speaks first, who stands where, how a complaint is entered, what happens next, and what happens after that. He fixed the mourning periods and the marriage observances and the order of precedence at a village gathering. And if that sounds like trivia to a modern ear, it was the load-bearing wall of the entire operation. Every one of those things is a container for behavior that already existed anyway. People were always going to trade grain, quarrel over boundaries, bury their parents, marry, and jockey for status. The magistrate's work had nothing to do with talking them out of any of it. His job was to build the shape those inevitable behaviors would be poured into, so that the same self-interest that produces chaos in one container produces order in another. He had a word for the whole category of designed, repeated, external form. The word is liya. It gets translated as ritual, which in English suggests incense and robes and something optional and decorative, and that translation has done real damage. Read it closer to the engineering sense. A standard, a fixture, a jig, the thing you clamp the workpiece into so that the cut lands in the same place, whether or not the person holding the tool is having a good morning. And underneath sat a claim about human beings that made him the most unpopular Confucian of his era, and still does. Mencius, a generation earlier, had taught that human nature is good, that the impulse toward decency is native, like a seed, and the work of a life is cultivation. Water it, shelter it, do not trample it, and it grows into what it already wanted to be. It is a warm doctrine, and it is the doctrine underneath almost everything you have ever read about building a better life. Find your authentic motivation. Reconnect with what you really want. Remove the blocks. The good version of you is in there. Shun Kuang said no, flatly, and in a chapter title, which is a very deliberate way to pick a fight. Menching pick. Human nature is bad. Its good comes from wise, from conscious, deliberate, constructed activity, not from watering the seed, from building the machine. His image for it is not botanical at all. It is a workshop. A warped board, he says, has to be laid against a straightening frame and steamed and bent before it will run true, and it needs that not because it is being punished, but because straightness is not in it. Clay does not become a pot by being encouraged. It becomes a pot on a wheel, under hands, in a fire. The wood does not resent the press. The press is simply the only thing in the room that knows what straight is. Now, that sounds harsh in the way that mechanical descriptions always sound harsh next to warm ones. Sit with the actual content of it for a second, because there is something in it he was very clear about, and modern readers consistently miss. He is not saying people are wicked. He is not moralizing. He is saying that the raw material arrives without the shape, and that the shape is manufacturable. Those are two completely different sentences. And the second one is the entire reason the XUNZI is a practical book rather than a pessimistic one. Mencius's position, for all its warmth, quietly makes your failure a personal indictment. The good seed was in you, so if nothing grew, look at what you did to it. Shun Kuang's position takes the seed out of the picture. Nothing was ever supposed to grow on its own. There is no verdict available about your inner quality because your inner quality was never the operative variable. The operative variable is the press, and a press, unlike a seed, is a thing you can build on a Tuesday. Badly at first, feeling nothing about it whatsoever. He spent 17 years in Lanling watching that principle work at the scale of a district. Ordinary, unreformed, self-interested people running through well-designed forms, producing outcomes that none of them individually intended and that no amount of exhortation had ever produced. He was not surprised. He had predicted it in a hall in Qi years earlier, while everybody around him was still arguing about which doctrine was true. He wrote it down as advice about learning and about governing and about becoming the kind of person the classical Chinese tradition called a noble person, which in his usage has nothing to do with birth and everything to do with what you have been run through. But the sentence he opens with, the very first line of the very first chapter of the book that carries his name, has nothing to do with government. It is a specification, and it is aimed directly at you. You set an alarm for 5,000 in tomorrow, and you mean it completely. That sentence is true. You are not lying to yourself when you set it. The intention is real. The desire is real. The reasons are all good ones, and none of that has ever been the problem. You have had genuine intention 11 times. What you have never had is the thing the intention was supposed to be loaded into. So let us step out of Lanling now, because the district was never really the subject of this video, and the man running it knew that when he wrote it down. The first line of the first chapter of the XUNZI'S is this: learning must never cease. And then, immediately, before any argument, he gives you two images and a piece of machinery. Blue, he says, comes from the indigo plant, and yet it is bluer than indigo. Ice is made from water, and yet it is colder than water. Something goes into a process and comes out more than what it went in as. Then the machinery. Wood as straight as a plumb line may be bent into a wheel as round as if it were drawn with a compass. And this is the clause everyone skips. Even after the wood has dried, it will not straighten out again, because this is the way it has been bent. Read that clause slowly, because it contains the entire technical content of habit formation, written 23 centuries before anyone had that phrase. The wood does not merely bend while the press is on it. Any fool can bend wood while the press is on it. The wood holds the bend after the press comes off and the moisture is gone. The shape becomes the wood's own. There is no longer any effort involved in being a wheel, and no press in the room, and no memory in the timber of ever having been forced. It is simply round now. That is what a formed habit actually is, not a thing you are heroically sustaining, a shape you now hold at rest. And the reason your 11 attempts collapsed is now sitting in plain view, and it has nothing to do with your character. You were trying to hold the bend by hand. Every single time. You gripped the wood, applied your own strength directly to it, and held, and for 6 days, or 9 or 14, you succeeded, because you are stronger than you give yourself credit for. Then your hands opened, the way hands do, and the wood went straight, because the wood had never been steamed, and there had never been a frame in the room. Only you, gripping. The other half of his claim is the one that makes people uncomfortable, so let us take it directly. In a chapter he titled with deliberate bluntness, "Human Nature is Bad," he argued that a warped board has to be laid against a straightening frame and steamed and bent before it will run true, and that it needs that not because it is defective, but because straightness was never in it. Clay does not become a vessel by being encouraged. Nothing in the workshop straightens itself. Everything you have ever read about self-improvement assumes the opposite. It assumes there is a better version of you already present, and that your job is to reconnect with it, want it more sincerely, remove whatever is in its way. That framework has a hidden cost you have been paying for years without an itemized bill. If the good version was already in there, then 11 failures are 11 pieces of evidence about you, about your seriousness, about whether you are the kind of person who follows through. Xun Kuang's framework removes that evidence entirely, and it does so on a technicality that happens to be true. The good version was never in there. It was never supposed to be. Nothing was going to grow on its own, in you or in anyone, including every disciplined person you have ever quietly envied. So there is no conclusion available about your inner quality, because your inner quality was not the variable under test. The variable under test was whether there was a frame in the room, and a frame is a completely different class of object from a motivation. A motivation has to be felt to work, which means it is unavailable on precisely the days you need it. A frame does not care how you feel. It is external. It is dumb. It holds the same shape at 5040 on a morning when you are inspired, and at 5040 on a morning when you are hollowed out and resentful and would rather be almost anywhere else. That indifference is not a limitation of the frame. That indifference is the entire product. So the conclusion you reached about yourself after 11 attempts was measuring the wrong object entirely. You have been asking the wrong thing of yourself, and asking it very sincerely. You do not need to become the kind of wood that stays bent. You need to stop gripping and go build the press. Something genuinely valuable is about to get taken away from you in this chapter, and it deserves to be named honestly first. The story where you generate it yourself is a good story. It is not vanity. Self-reliance is a real virtue. The ability to do a hard thing purely because you decided to is a real capacity, and people who have it are not deluded about having it. When you got through a difficult stretch on nothing but your own decision, that happened. Nobody carried you. There is a specific dignity in that which no external system will ever hand back to you, and anyone who tells you to discard it entirely is selling you something. Hold on to the dignity. The strategy has to go. Back to the district for a moment, and to the least romantic detail of the whole operation. A magistrate in Chu did not walk his jurisdiction persuading farmers to be reliable. He built things. A granary with a fixed opening day. A set of bronze measuring vessels that defined what a measure of grain was, physically, in metal, so that the definition did not live in anyone's judgment or good faith. A calendar nailed to a sequence. Assessment on this day, hearings on that one. A prescribed order for a dispute. Who speaks first, who stands where, what is entered, what follows. None of that equipment improved a single person's character. That was never its function. Its function was that a self-interested farmer walking through it produced an orderly outcome without having to become a better farmer first. Jung Huang states the underlying principle outright, and it is one of the strangest sentences a Confucian ever wrote. By borrowing a horse and carriage, he says, you will not improve your feet, but you can cover 1,000 klishi. By borrowing a boat and paddles, you will not improve your ability in water, but you can cross rivers and seas. And then the line, the noble person is by birth no different from others, but he is good at borrowing from external things. By birth no different. In a tradition obsessed with the cultivation of superior persons, the man says the superior person has no superior equipment inside him. The whole differential is acquired apparatus, which reframes something you have been misreading for years. Every disciplined person you know, the friend who has trained for 9 years, the colleague who ships work at a rate that seems physically impossible, whoever you compare yourself to at your least generous, you have been reading them as people who have more of the internal substance. Almost none of them do. What they have is a great deal of borrowed carriage, installed so long ago and so invisibly that even they have stopped seeing it and will describe it to you sincerely as discipline. Look at what is actually carrying them. A fixed hour that was decided once, years ago, and has not been redecided since. A training partner who will be standing outside at 6, whether or not they feel like it, which converts a private negotiation into a social one and quietly removes the negotiation. A room, or a desk, or a bench that means only one thing, so that being in it is already most of the work. A kit laid out the night before by a version of them that had energy, for the use of a version that will not. A route with no decision point in it. A standing appointment. A recurring payment. A phone in a different room. Every one of those is a carriage. Not one of them is a feeling. And notice what the design principle actually is, because it is more precise than make it easy. Each of those devices moves a decision from the moment of weakness to a moment of strength. You are not stronger at 5040. You will never be stronger at 5040. But you were plenty strong at 9 p.m. last night, and you can spend that strength on laying out the shoes, which is a decision made once by the strong version and merely obeyed by the weak one. That is the transfer. That is the whole trick, which means the question you have been asking, how do I become someone who does this, has a much duller and much more answerable sibling. What would have to exist in the physical world for the weakest, plausible version of me to do this anyway? That question has answers. Cheap ones mostly. They are just not flattering because you cannot take credit for a carriage the way you can take credit for willpower. The 17-year magistrate would have found the trait obvious, and he would have made it without a second thought. He was not there to be admired for governing well by hand. He was there to lead a district that ran. In the southern marshes there is a bird that builds beautifully. It weaves its nest from feathers bound together with hair, tight and warm and well made, and it suspends that nest from the very tips of the reeds. Then the wind comes, as wind does in a marsh. The reeds break, the eggs smash, the young die. Xun Quan puts that scene in his first chapter, and then delivers the diagnosis in a single clause that ought to be printed on the inside of every planner ever sold. This is not because the nest is wanting, but because of the way it is attached. The nest is fine. That is the whole point of telling you about the craftsmanship first. The weaving is not the failure. A better nest would not have helped. A more committed bird, a more sincere bird, a bird who had watched more videos about nest building would have lost the same eggs on the same morning because the defect was never in the object. The defect was in the attachment point. Now go and look at your 11 attempts with that specific question and only that question, because it changes what you see. Your plans were good plans. This is the part you have never given yourself. And it is factually true. The training program was sound. The writing schedule was realistic. The sleep protocol was well researched. The language app was the right one. You are not bad at making plans. You have made 11 competent plans. Every one of them was tied to the tips of reeds. Watch what they were actually anchored to. One was anchored to a mood. It ran while the excitement lasted, which is another way of saying it was suspended from a weather system. One was anchored to a season, to the specific atmospheric pressure of a January or a birthday or the week after a bad medical result. One was anchored to a stretch of unusually empty calendar and functioned perfectly right up until an ordinary busy fortnight arrived. And several of them, the ones that hurt most, were anchored to a self-image. They ran while you could still believe you were the sort of person who did this. And the first missed session damaged the belief. And the damaged belief could no longer hold the plan. And the plan came down carrying the belief with it. 2 eggs, 1 reed. Wind is not the exceptional event in this story. Wind is the marsh. A week of poor sleep, a work crisis, a sick child, a low mood with no traceable cause, a trip, a minor injury, an argument that occupies your whole head for 3 days. None of that is bad luck, and none of it is a reason. It is the standard operating environment. And any structure that requires its absence is a structure that has already failed and simply has not been told yet. So the audit is a single question, and it is not, is this plan good? Ask instead, what does this hang from, and what happens to it on the worst available Tuesday? If the honest answer is, it hangs from me being in decent shape that day, the reeds are already bending, and the fix is almost never a better plan. The fix is a lower, dumber, more boring anchor. A standing time that exists in a shared calendar other people can see. A commitment made out loud to one specific person who will notice. A minimum version so small it survives the flu, not the real session, the 2-minute version whose only job is to keep the practice attached while the wind is up. A physical location that means one thing: money already spent. None of these are inspiring. All of them are load-bearing. And the same chapter gives you the positive form, which is even less flattering and even more useful. If raspberry vines grow in the midst of hemp, he says, they will stand up straight without being staked. If white sand is mixed with mud, it turns black, stood up straight without being staked. No effort inside the vine. No decision. The surrounding growth is dense and vertical, so the vine is vertical, and the vine did not have to want it, which is the whole reason he says that the person who is serious about this chooses with care the place where they will live and the company they keep when they travel. And it is why he warns you in the same breath about the sand, because the mechanism runs in both directions and is not on your side by default. You have felt this operate and read it as motivation. The week you spent around someone who trains and found yourself training, the room where everybody was working and you worked, the group chat that made a thing normal. You were not more inspired in those stretches. You were hemp adjacent. That is a technique, and it is available deliberately, and it is significantly cheaper than becoming a different person. How many videos like this one have you watched? Not this year. Total. Across all of it, the podcasts at 1.5 speed on the commute, the books you finished and the ones you got 60 pages into, the threads you saved, the systems you read about in detail and could explain to a friend tonight with real fluency. Add it up honestly and hold the number, because I am not going to answer the question yet, and neither are you. Xun Kuang measured this failure mode in the 3rd century BCE and gave it a dimension, which is the most quietly devastating thing in the entire chapter. The learning of the lesser man, he writes, enters his ear and comes out his mouth. With only 4 inches between ear and mouth, how can he possess it long enough to beautify a 7-foot body? 4 inches. That is the distance the material traveled. In through the ear, a short hop, out through the mouth, repeated to a colleague, agreed with in a comment, explained at dinner with genuine enthusiasm, posted. It never got below the jaw. It never reached an arm or a leg or a Tuesday morning. And a man is not sneering at ignorance here, which is what makes it land. The lesser man in this passage is not uninformed. He is extremely well informed. He can talk. That is precisely the problem being described. Set against it the other route, and notice how much longer it is. The learning of the noble person enters his ear, is stored in his mind, spreads through his 4 limbs, and is made visible in his activity and his tranquility, in his smallest word, in his slightest movement. Ear, then mind, then limbs, then conduct, then the way he sits in a room when nothing is happening. 4 stations instead of 2, and the last 2 are physical. So now answer the question you have been holding. Of everything you have consumed on this subject, and it is a substantial volume, more than most people in history could have accessed in 10 lifetimes, how much of it is in your limbs? Asa, not much. And the gap between how much you know and how much has reached your body is, at this point, probably the single largest structural problem in your practice. It is certainly larger than your knowledge deficit, which is approximately 0. You are not 11 attempts in because you are missing information. You have never once been missing information. There is a second line in the same passage that goes further, and it stings in a more personal register. In antiquity, he says, learning was carried on for the sake of oneself. Today, learning is carried on for the sake of others. He wrote today about a Tuesday in the Warring States, which should tell you how old this problem is. Learning has become a performance of seriousness rather than an operation on a self. Ask what function the consumption is actually serving. Watching this video produces a genuine sensation, a warm, forward-leaning, competent feeling of movement. That sensation is nearly indistinguishable from the sensation of progress, and it arrives at a fraction of the cost, which means the material is not neutral. It can be metabolized into a substitute for the act, and the more sophisticated your intake, the more convincing the substitute becomes. The person who has read 40 books on discipline has 40 books worth of felt progress and, quite often, no press in the room. I am aware of what this means for the thing you are currently doing, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. You have been in your ear for 20 minutes. On the evidence of this passage, roughly none of it has moved yet, and if you finish this video, feel clarified, and open another one, then this has been 4 inches and an evening. So the rule that comes out of this chapter is a ratio, and it is unforgiving. Nothing new enters until one thing has reached the limbs. One practice, installed with a frame and an anchor, performed on a day you did not feel like it, That is one thing arriving in the body. Until that has happened, additional input stops counting as preparation and becomes the 4 inches running on a loop in a well-informed person who is not changing. Qi was the name of a famous racehorse, and Xunquang uses it to make a point about arithmetic. The line runs like this. Though a thoroughbred like Qi cannot cover 10 paces in one leap, the sorriest nag can do it in 10 yokings. Achievement, he adds, consists of never giving up. Look at what that actually concedes and what it refuses. It concedes the talent gap completely. The famous horse is a famous horse. The worst horse in the district is the worst horse in the district. Nobody is pretending they are equivalent. What it refuses is the conclusion. The best horse alive still cannot clear 10 paces in a single bound. No creature can, which means the distance was always going to be covered in installments by everybody, and the only thing talent ever bought was a smaller number of installments. Not a different category of achievement, a shorter invoice. That converts talent from a verdict into a schedule, and it does something specific to the comparison you keep making. When you measure yourself against the person who is 9 years in, you are not looking at a creature that leaps. You are looking at a nag with a lot of yokings behind it, possibly a better nag than you. Almost certainly not a better nag by the margin you have assigned in your head, because the margin you have assigned is doing emotional work rather than mathematical work. He builds it out with the physical version. Accumulate earth and you get a mountain, and then wind and rain gather there. The mountain generates its own weather, which is a very precise description of what a mature practice does. Accumulate water and you get a deep pool. And then flatly, if you do not accumulate little steps, you have no means to journey 1,000 li. If you do not pile up small streams, you have no way to fill a river or a sea. There is a companion image about carving that is harsher. Start cutting and stop, and you cannot get through rotten wood. Persist without stopping, and you can carve and inlay metal or stone. The same tool, the same hand. The only variable is whether the cutting continued. But the most useful thing in this section is the pair of animals, and it is the diagnosis most viewers actually need, because it is not about effort at all. The earthworm, he points out, has no claws, no teeth, no strong muscles, no bones worth mentioning. It is the least equipped creature in the analogy, and it feasts on the mud above ground and drinks at the springs below, and he tells you exactly why. Because it keeps its mind on one thing. The crab has 6 legs and 2 pincers, genuinely well armed by comparison, and it cannot lodge anywhere unless it finds a hole some snake dug for it. And he tells you why that is too, because it allows its mind to go off in all directions. Then the summary line, which is one sentence and does not need help. One who travels 2 roads at once will arrive nowhere. You have not been failing as a worm. You have been failing as a crab. Go back over the 11 attempts and count how many were running concurrently. The gym and the language and the side project and the sleep protocol and the reading target launched inside the same fortnight, each with a real plan, each adequately resourced, each drawing on the same finite pool of attention. Nothing in that pattern is a failure of will. That is a well-equipped animal going in 6 directions and consequently having to borrow a hole. And it feels productive at the outset, which is the trap. 6 simultaneous starts generate 6 times the sensation of momentum and, reliably, less than 1 completion. Later in the same chapter, he sets the standard for what counts as finished, and it is deliberately unreasonable. One who misses a single shot in 100 does not deserve to be called a good archer. One who does not take the last half step in a journey of 1,000 li does not deserve to be called a good carriage driver. The last half step, not the first 999 li, those are assumed. Those are table stakes. The rigor lives at the end, in the unglamorous final fraction where nobody is watching and the outcome feels already determined. So the arithmetic gives you 2 instructions, and they fit together. Pick one road, because a creature with no equipment and one direction outperforms a well-armed creature with 6. Then count yokings instead of measuring yourself against a thoroughbred, because the yokings are the only part of this that has ever been under your control, and they accumulate whether or not you are impressed by them on the day. If you would take the ancient kings as your source, and humanness and rightness as your foundation, then rights are the means of correctly ordering warp and woof, pathways and byways. That sentence is a load-bearing condition, and almost everyone who has ever used this man's ideas has removed it. Read the structure of it rather than the content. Rights, the forms, the frames, the standard measures, everything this video has been recommending to you for the last half hour are the means. Means to what? To ordering the warp and the weft, the highways and the footpaths. And the whole apparatus is conditional on a foundation that comes first in the sentence and first in the design, humanness and rightness. Take those as your ground, he says, and then the forms will order everything correctly. Do not take those as your ground and the forms still work. That is the horror of it. They work just as well. They simply order everything towards something else. He did not have to speculate about this, and neither do we, because the experiment was run inside one generation of his own classroom by people who sat in front of him. The histories record two of his students as Han Fei and Li Si. Both became the leading minds of legalism. Li Si rose to become Chancellor of the state of Qin and was instrumental in the unification of 221 BCE, the moment the warring states ended, and China became a single administered empire under one law. And what Li Si carried out of his teacher's classroom was the mechanism, intact and brilliantly understood. Human beings are raw material. Form shapes them, standardize the form, and you standardize the people. He kept every part of that. He discarded the condition in the sentence. What you get when you keep the shaping and drop the humannesses, the Qin state. Standardized weights, standardized axle widths, standardized script, standardized law applied without exception, total form, total compliance, extraordinary administrative achievement, genuinely one of the great feats of ancient governance, and a machine that used the people inside it for a purpose not one of them would have chosen. The forms were perfect. There was nothing in them for the person being formed. Now bring that home. Because you have already built one of these, and you know exactly which month it was. Think about your harshest attempt, not the half-hearted one, the serious one, the 4030 alarm, the rules with no exceptions in them, the tracking spreadsheet that functioned as a charge sheet, the internal voice you deployed as fuel, the one that called you soft when you hesitated, that you privately considered the most honest voice you had. That attempt probably produced your best 3 weeks of output in years, which is why it still has a grip on you. And then it ended, and it ended completely. And you have never been able to get back into it, no matter how badly you wanted the results again. That was a small Qin. You installed total form with no humanness in it, and it did what total form does. It performed superbly, and then it required continuous coercion to stand up. And coercion has to be resupplied every single day from a fuel tank that empties. A frame does not need resupplying. That is the entire reason we started with the press. But contempt is not a frame. Contempt is you, gripping the wood again in a costume that looks like structure. This is also why you cannot go back. Some part of you correctly registered that the arrangement was hostile, and it will not consent to re-entering. What you have been reading as your own weakness is a reasonably intelligent refusal. So, the last instruction is a test, and it takes about 4 seconds to run on any system you are considering. Would you put a person you actually care about inside this structure? Not could they endure it. Would you install it around someone whose well-being mattered to you at the level of intensity, with that voice narrating it, and feel fine about having done that? If the answer is no, the structure will not hold you either. Not because you lack toughness, because the man who designed this whole approach put the condition first in the sentence on purpose, and his own student proved what happens to the ones who cut it out. Go back to the district one last time, now that you can see what it was. A man of about 60, 17 years in the same administrative post, in a state that would be annexed within a generation, governing several thousand people who were never going to become good spontaneously and whom he never once expected to. No illusions about the raw material, including his own. And out of that job, not out of a mountain retreat, came a book whose first chapter is a set of specifications for how any nature gets reformed. He was not writing about you. He was writing down what he had watched actually work, which is a rarer thing in philosophy than it should be. So, here is the specification, plainly, with nothing left in the ear. Build the press, because nothing straightens itself and you have been gripping the wood by hand for 11 attempts. Borrow the carriage, because the noble person is by birth no different from others, and every disciplined person you envy is running on installed equipment they have stopped seeing. Check the anchor before the wind comes, because your plans were never the problem and the reeds always break. Let one thing reach your limbs before you let anything new in your ear. Count yokings instead of measuring yourself against the thoroughbred, and pick one road, because the earthworm has no claws and eats well, and keep the humanness in the form, or you will build a small chin and it will run beautifully for 3 weeks and then refuse you entry forever. None of that requires you to feel anything tomorrow morning. That is the point of all of it. Motivation was never the engine. It was the exhaust, a pleasant byproduct of a machine that was already running, which is why chasing it never started anything, and why its absence has never actually been your obstacle. You have the whole specification now. What you do not have yet is a single frame installed in physical reality, and that gap is closable today in about 10 minutes, badly, while feeling nothing. Comment below, name the read, take the attempt that hurt the most to lose. Tell me exactly what it was tied to, the mood, the season, the empty calendar, the self-image, and then tell me what you are going to tie it to instead. 1 sentence each. Be specific enough that someone could check on you. And if this channel is useful to you, subscribe to Mind Koi. A koi kept in a small tank stays small and moved into open water. It grows to fit what it has been given. The water does the work the fish could never do for itself. That is the whole idea we build here. Change the water, not the fish. New forms, new frames, every week. Now go build the press. The wood is fine.